few months ago, I wondered, can I use artificial intelligence to help me to create a novel study for my kids? Specifically, I wanted to create a novel study of the book My Side of the Mountain for my 4th and 6th graders. I wanted a custom experience for my kids. My kids have their own unique learning needs. As a homeschool mom of 9 years, I know what works for me as a homeschool mom, for my family in general, for each of my kids. I know what works for us. And so I thought, I wonder if I can get AI or ChatGPT to help me out with that, to get rid of some of the tedium and to help me to get this done a little faster, because creating a novel study does require a bit of work. And so I decided to give it a try. Now, I do want to use ChatGPT both effectively and responsibly. And so I completed the prompt engineer specialization in Coursera so that I could get the most out of chatbots while spending the least amount of time trying to get the chatbot to do what I want it to do, even though it still took some time. So you're going to benefit from the many hours I spent doing all that learning about prompt engineering, as I show you a bit about how I ended up using ChatGPT to create this awesome novel study. If I do say so myself, it's the first one that I've created, and it's really just for my kids, but I'm pretty proud of what I came up with. I did enjoy doing it, and I'm hoping this ends up being a really fun learning activity for me and my kids. So I'm going to show you this workbook now and tell you about how I created it and where I use ChatGPT to make the process easier for me. All right, so let's get started. First off, I do want to suggest that you don't even think about creating a novel study until you decide up front what you want out of it. Like, what do you want your kids to learn? For me, I knew I wanted them to do copy work. I wanted to get quotes from the book to do some copy work. I wanted to get vocabulary from the book and for them to do their vocabulary learning that way. And I knew I would want to cover some other language arts topics, not every academic objective for language arts through this one book, but I knew I wanted to do several, maybe do some chapter summaries in order to do a sort of written narration, that kind of thing. So think about what you might want to cover in the book. Like, what you need to have a direction that you're going, something that you're going for. You need to know what the finish line is. And if you're going to start a trip, you don't, well, I mean, I guess you can't go and just drive wherever you want to go. That might be an interesting trip. But for this trip, we want to decide our destination up front, or at least have an idea of it. So that's what I did. I had in mind, I wrote down several things I thought, several ways I might want to use this book to cover some topics. Also, nature learning. It is my side of the mountain. So I also thought, well, this might be a way to learn more about nature and maybe do some hands-on activities. Think about what that finish line might look like for you, what that destination might look like for you and your kids. Also, consider your kids' learning methods and their delights. If your kid hates worksheets, you're not going to want to create a bunch of worksheets probably. If your kids prefer learning through the spoken word, maybe they want to listen to the audiobook instead of reading the book. So that kind of thing. For my kids and for what works for our family, they like things that are written down, things that are highly visual. And so worksheets work for us. And I knew that I wanted it to be guided learning, but that they could do a lot of it independently. That's why I decided to create this workbook. All right. Once you do all that, you need to read the book. If you're going to be using ChatGPT to help you with this, I highly recommend that you read the ebook. I get it. I love a physical book too. I love the feel of the pages and the smell and just the experience of having a physical book. But I have learned to also love ebooks just for the convenience. I have physical copies of this book, but I also bought the Kindle version on Amazon. And I also have the Kindle app on all of my devices, my computer, my iPads, my phone. I love that. I love the convenience of that I could be reading the book at home while I'm, eating some soup, reading it on my iPad. And then later on, when I'm waiting for my kids to finish something or I'm at the doctor's office, I could be reading it on my phone. I pick up where I left off. So that's nice. Specifically for this study, I'd say what I found to be helpful was to read it in the Kindle app. It was easier to do on the Kindle app because then you want to go through and be able to highlight. For me, I knew I wanted to use quotes from the book for copy work. So I would highlight all of the passages that I thought would make good copy work. I knew I wanted to use words from the book for vocabulary. And so I would highlight sentences with the vocabulary words that I thought would make good vocabulary word options. So highlighting it is super easy on an iPad or a phone. And then you can also add a note to that section that you highlighted. If I highlighted a passage for copy work, I would add a note to that highlight saying copy work. If it was a vocabulary word, I'd say vocabulary and say what word in that sentence I was using for vocabulary. If I got an idea for a hands-on activity or, oh, here's some geography learning we could do, I would highlight those and then add a note saying all that. So that makes it really nice. When I started reading the book, I was really just looking for vocabulary words and copy work. But as I was reading through, I saw that the author used a lot of similes and metaphors and some personification. So I thought, you know what, those will be good language arts academic objectives to cover with this book. And so I would highlight those sections and mark them as like simile or whatever. I had that destination in mind, but I was able to flesh out that destination a little bit more. My metaphor is really falling apart here. By reading the book and then taking notes in the Kindle app as I went along. Yes, you can write down, oh, I like to write things down in a notebook. Okay, more power to you. But when it comes to using ChatGPT, that's not going to be the most effective way to go about things because you're going to have to transfer that to your computer anyway, you know? So might as well just start off and speed up the process. And by the way, when you make those notes, copy work, vocabulary, whatever, be consistent in how you type them in to the notes. Spell things the same way every time. Use the same type of uppercase and lowercase letters. Don't one time put vocabulary all lowercase, another time with an uppercase V, and then the other letters lowercase. Don't write vocabulary sometimes and then vocab other times. You want to be consistent because ChatGPT is going to create Python code. It's going to write a program in order to do what you want it to do. To computer code, a lowercase letter is not the same thing as an uppercase letter. Those are two different characters. And so be consistent. I mean, you can work through that later on in this process and kind of fix those mistakes or those lacks of consistency. But if you just decide up front, okay, I'm always going to type vocabulary like this, then it's going to make things a lot easier for you later on. Okay, so once you've read the book, you got all your Kindle notes and highlights, then you can use a website called clippings.io. Using clippings.io, you can export your highlights, your Kindle notes and highlights to a spreadsheet. You can export things to like a text file and all, but I recommend using the spreadsheet option because that creates very structured data and that's easier for ChatGPT to process. Once you've got your spreadsheet, open it, look at it. Look for lacks of consistency. Even though I was trying up front I know the importance of keeping text consistent to be processed by a computer program. I mean, I've written programs to parse text and all. So I know the importance. I still made mistakes. And so at this point, you can go through your spreadsheet and look to see if you type things wrong somewhere, if you misspelled the word vocabulary at some point, if you used the wrong case. So you can go through and fix things to make it a little easier for you once you put into ChatGPT. Okay, so once you've got your Clippings.io spreadsheet the way you want it, then you can upload that to ChatGPT and create a plan within ChatGPT to process that spreadsheet to create another spreadsheet. This is what I did, a lesson planning spreadsheet where it pulls out all those different learning goals that you have in your notes in your Kindle app. Hands-on activities, geography learning, vocabulary, language arts topics, whatever you're learning about, you want your kids to learn about, you can take all of those and create different columns for them, put your quotes where you want them to be, create a nice spreadsheet. If you want to see how I did that in ChatGPT, I'll have to recreate the chat for you because I had to figure out how to do this. And so it wasn't just in one chat that I can walk you through right now. If you're interested, let me know. I'm willing, but only if I get like 5 or more people to tell me they're interested, because it will require some work for me. And I don't want to create another video people don't watch. So let me know if you're interested. And if enough people are interested, I will create a video showing how to do that. But I was really happy with the final result. I had my little lesson planning worksheet where I had like chapters on the side and columns for the different types of learning I was going to have my kids do, different types of worksheets I was going to have my kids do for each chapter. And then I used that lesson planning worksheet that I got, and it was an Excel worksheet that I got from ChatGPT to guide me as I created worksheets for this workbook for my kids. So now I'm going to walk you through this workbook and point out to you where else I use ChatGPT to help me create some of the worksheets. Now, remember, ChatGPT isn't meant to do all the work for you. It's meant to, among other things, to help get rid of some of the tedium and to speed up what you're doing. And whatever you get from ChatGPT, you should consider it to be a draft, not a final product. You always want your own human creativity and intelligence to guide the process. ChatGPT is just a tool. It's not doing it for you. It's just helping you along. And so you're going to see that as I point out some of these worksheets for you. So first I'll point out that I created the worksheets in Canva. As you can see, lots of graphics. Canva's perfect for this kind of thing. For the cover, the front and back covers, these graphics right here in this back one, I created in ChatGPT. It's ChatGPT 4, by the way, not the 3.5. It's like 4 and above is able to do these things where it processes files for you, can create files for you, write the Python code and all, and create graphics. So it took a little bit of doing, but I was able to talk ChatGPT through the process of creating an image that I liked. And then I took this image and put it in Canva with all this other, the title and all that to create the front cover. And then I created PDF files and upload them to the Barnes & Noble Press to create this workbook, which was really pretty inexpensive. It was just a few dollars. I'll put the video down below that I found of another homeschool mom who uses Barnes & Noble Press to create like these type textbooks and all for her kids. I thought it was such a good idea, and I kept that in mind so that I knew I would use that in the future, and I did. And it's nice because you can create your own covers and all, and then even on the sides, see how you can put what you want on the side. All right, so now let's look at the innards of this workbook. This first page that I labeled table of contents, it was just a way for me to match up chapter titles with a chapter number, because in the book she doesn't have chapter numbers, and for my worksheets I knew I wanted to use chapter numbers instead of writing like the whole chapter. It's just easier to reference a chapter number. So what I did was, when I was reading through the book, I highlighted the chapter titles, and in the note for that chapter title I would say like chapter 1, chapter 2. I labeled them there in the book, so then that was in my Kindle highlights file. And when I processed that file in ChatGPT, I had ChatGPT correlate the chapter number with a chapter title and put that into my spreadsheet to make all that easier for me. So this is just really to help out my kids know how to use this workbook. All right. So I told you I knew I wanted to use ChatGPT for vocabulary worksheets. I had ChatGPT help me create these vocabulary worksheets. So I looked at my lesson planning spreadsheet, and since I had it separate out for each chapter what vocabulary I'd highlighted to use, I then took those vocabulary words, and sometimes I would say like create options for a typical, more classical vocabulary worksheet using these words and a more creative worksheet. So this is just the more standard type vocabulary worksheet. And so it created this text, the definitions and sentences to fill in the vocabulary words in those sentences. I will warn you, ChatGPT isn't necessarily what you want to use for facts. Yeah, it's been trained on a lot of information, but the power of ChatGPT is in its creativity and idea creation. When people try to use it to get facts, they get wrong information because that's not really the purpose for it. But I went ahead and used it for these definitions, and I think it worked out okay. So just a warning about that. You're going to want to look back over it to make sure things are copacetic, you know? All right, so I took the text from ChatGPT and then put it into Canva and made it pretty. Sometimes I will tell ChatGPT to alphabetize the words. I did that on some of the flora and fauna pages, not necessarily on the word banks, but like I could tell it to take this group of words and do something with it and copy it in there. And then I created this word bank box in Canva, put the text in there, bold-faced some stuff, added these graphics to make it a little more fun and cutesy and all for my kids. So you see how I took what ChatGPT created, but used it as a draft. My final product is something that I came up with that I think will be pleasing for my kids and that will help the learning to happen. I also included some things for them to read in cursive because my kids have been practicing their cursive writing, but you know, fun fact, at least for my kids, just because they're learning how to write in cursive doesn't mean they can read it. So I'm having to really enforce the practicing reading cursive. So that's why there's a few places that I included some cursive writing. I found a good font in Canva for cursive writing that's legible. So this is just a way for me to sneak in a little bit of cursive reading practice. But what's specifically being said here is for them to consider what of these vocabulary words they might want to use for their writing maybe in the future. So I have a couple of worksheets in the back for that. Worksheet for strong verbs for writing, quality adjectives, ly adverbs. And so that's going to be part of the vocabulary learning, not just learning the words, but thinking about using the words. Okay. So as I was reading through My Side of the Mountain, I saw places where she used personification, similes, metaphors. So I thought we'll cover those language arts topics. So I used ChatGPT to help me, and I've talked about this in a video in the past, where I said, okay, explain personification to me like I'm 5. You can choose different ages to figure out what's a good explanation, a good way to explain it to the person who's learning. And so I used ChatGPT for that, like for personification and later worksheets for similes and metaphors. And I worked with that a little bit, and then I took that as a draft, changed it up a little bit, and then copied it in here, but into this different format. So ChatGPT didn't create this worksheet for me. I took some of the text. I like where this is going here. Let me format it in a way that's kind of cute, use some cute graphics and all, so that it's easy for my kids to read. They don't feel like they're reading like a wall of text. It's split up into little chunks for them to take in, and then some practice. So in my Kindles and Highlights spreadsheet, which was processed into my lesson plan spreadsheet, I highlighted quotes and says, oh, this is an example of personification, and I wrote personification in the notes. So then when it came time to create my worksheets, it was pretty simple. The hardest part was picking out the graphics and how I was going to format it to make it look cute and to kind of put it all on one page. And so then this is a copywork page where I'm having them mark up a passage from the book as far as personification goes. And then I also do some cursive writing. Nature and geography, I marked up places where, oh, we can talk about geography from because of this place that was being mentioned in the book. And so we're going to be talking about the Catskill Mountains. And then I had ChatGPT help me with this flora and fauna section where I marked up sentences in the book where plant life was mentioned or fauna, some animal life was mentioned, and had ChatGPT create columns for me for that and then alphabetize the words and all. And then it was easy for me to copy that out from that lesson planning spreadsheet and copy them here into this page. What I'm doing with this is when my kids come to one of these pages, they're going to find examples. Like they can either draw an acorn or they can find a picture of one and then write a label and then put them up on a poster that I also created through ChatGPT. Images of like a mountain scene and all, and they would put it like where it might belong. And so I created these 2 big posters. I created the graphics in ChatGPT similar to creating, these graphics. And then had them print out at Walgreens, actually. Then whenever they get to that, they're going to work together to put those on the posters, and hopefully that works out. All right, another copywork activity. I knew I was going to have my kids do hands-on activities related to the book. My kids were all in scouts, and so they do have an interest in outdoorsy type things. I'm not outdoorsy, I'm outsidey, like the meme goes, but my kids are a little more outdoorsy than me, my oldest especially. So I wanted to integrate some scout type learning into this novel study, not just for the fun of it, but also for them to empathize with the character, because we will be talking a lot at the end of the book through another resource I found about the protagonist. And I thought the more they can empathize with the character, the better. So I talked to ChatGPT about it. I want to create this part of this workbook. How could I label that? I want to create an image for, what could I call that kind of section? And it gave me some ideas. And so I liked the wilderness workshop. I don't know if you can see this, the wilderness workshop idea. And then I had ChatGPT create this graphic that I'm putting on all the pages where there's one of these hands-on activities. Now, I will warn you that when you create graphics through AI, wherever it is, whether it's ChatGPT or somewhere else, it doesn't do words. I mean, it does images. So as of right now, I don't know of one where it includes words very well. You often end up with something that looks like it was written in another language, like it should be a word, but it's not. So I was actually pretty amazed that this came out the way it did. I'll probably look back at this while I'm editing and be like, that's not spelled right, but it's pretty good. First glance, it's just like, okay, that's good enough. We get the idea. And it's a really cute graphic. So my thought is every time my kids see this graphic, they're like, oh, good, we get to do a fun activity now. So that's what this is. And I give clear instructions. This was part of what I wanted out of this novel study, something where the instructions are all right here. I do spell out, this is something you need to do with mom or dad. I wanted the instructions here to refer back to. It needs to be very specific. One of my kids, well, two of my kids, but one of the ones doing this study are on the autism spectrum. And so they really do well with very clear written instructions. This reading summary page is actually something I created in the past. I just changed the theming with the little leaves and all that for this workbook. But this is a way I've had a couple of my kids do literature learning in the past, where they would read a chapter or two from their whatever book I assigned to them, and they'd fill out one of these worksheets. The idea is that they have this written narration section for what they read that day, an interesting sentence. So I thought this was kind of like copy work right here for spelling, learning, grammar, and all that, all the good things that copy work is good for. And then some vocabulary learning where they get to choose a word that they don't know or they're not sure about or they find interesting from what they read, and write down the sentence that it came from so they get the context of it, what part of speech, so some grammar learning, the definition for the word. And then if I were going to do this again, I'd get rid of this section right here since I have copy work in other places in this workbook. So in the future, this is what I might do. Get rid of this section, expand this section, so that then they have to write their own sentence using that vocabulary word, because I have found that to be a really useful exercise for learning vocabulary. And then also maybe add is this a word that you can come up with an antonym or a synonym for? Might, add something like that as well. And the reminder to here in cursive to ask themselves, is this a word they might use in their writing in the future? Okay, this is practicing personification, identifying that again, and with quotes from the book that I pulled from my handy dandy spreadsheet that ChatGPT created for me. And then more cursive reading practice. And this specifically is where I comment on how I think something was described beautifully by the author, because I would like my kids to think about enjoying the words, enjoy a beautiful turn of phrase or a beautiful sentence or a thought-provoking sentence instead of just reading it to get done with the reading. And so that's what I'm trying to encourage here. Okay, here we're learning about similes and metaphors. Again, I had ChatGPT come up with a way to describe this to a kid, and then I took that and formatted it in a way that I thought would be helpful for my kids and changed some of the words and all as well. So I took that draft from ChatGPT and then came up with a final product with some of my own wording and pictures to kind of describe what was being said to make it easier to understand and a little more fun. And then this time I had ChatGPT come up with examples for identifying similes and metaphors, and I copied that in here and formatted, added the little pictures and all. And then more practice in identifying similes and metaphors with quotes from the book that, again, I pulled from my spreadsheet that ChatGPT created for me. Another nature page with words that I had ChatGPT alphabetized for me and put all in lowercase letters. This is another vocabulary worksheet that ChatGPT created for me. Well, I think this part right here, since this was just one word this time, I just had these different sections, you know, the part of speech, a definition, use the word like I mentioned a minute ago. What are some synonym or anonym you can come up with for this word or find them? And then ChatGPT, I mentioned earlier, you can say, give me like a typical way a teacher might create a worksheet for this, and what's a more creative way. So this was a creative one that I liked, where imagine you're a scientist inventing a new safe material that is not combustible, and combustible is the vocabulary word. Describe the material, its uses, and why it's important that it's not combustible. So some writing, maybe a little bit of research, a little bit of fun, using the word right away. So different kind of vocabulary learning here. Another activity, more copy work, reading summary. I love these crossword pages. So I created these crossword puzzles in a website that I'll link down below. He also has a resource for creating word searches, but since this is vocabulary learning, I focus more on the crossword puzzles. So I got the definitions from ChatGPT, which, proceed with caution when doing that. But then I took the definitions and I put it into that website, and it came up with the crossword puzzle, and I copied that in here. So, by this point, since I have kind of my template for vocabulary pages, the title and place to put a word bank and all that, it was easy to just copy and paste this stuff. And then what took the longest was just figuring out, like finding images that would go with some of the vocabulary words and making it pretty, So the fun part. ChatGPT did some of the hard part. This other website did the really hard part. Instead of going into Canva and creating my own crossword puzzle, and that would take time to do. I could do it just like that through that website, and then I could just focus on the fun part, making it pretty. Some more language arts practice, using quotes from the book, copy work, nature learning. I want some variety in the workbook, but I also want some where the kids turn to it, they're like, okay, I know what's going on here. It's, I think, a little too stressful to do something new every day, for everything to be different. You do want some repetition in types of activities, or at least, especially one of my kids appreciates that a little bit more. But in order for it to not be too boring, you need a variety of activities, just not something completely different every day. So I don't think there's a problem with doing like this reading summary several times throughout this study, because the first time they might be like, oh, what's going on here? Or at least my youngest, who hasn't done this before. But after that, they'll be like, okay, I know what's expected of me here. I can do this. I had a mistake here. It doesn't matter how many times, for me anyway, that I go over something. I took this PDF, I uploaded it into GoodNotes on my iPad, I read through it, I marked up mistakes, I fixed them, and still, when I received this book, I found a couple of different mistakes in it. This is one of them. There's not copy work on this page. It's just an activity. But maybe since it says copy work, I'll tell my kids there's no lines, but you can still copy some of that down. Maybe I'll have them do that. Okay, so another vocabulary worksheet that ChatGPT created for me, or like the text, and then I created the worksheet. More language arts, learning using quotes from the book that I pulled from my spreadsheet. So you see some of the same activities here. Now this is a different type of vocabulary page. I got this template from Canva. So on Canva, you can look for worksheets, and you can see all different types of worksheets that other people have created. So this is one of them that I thought was a little bit of an easier one for them, that it'll still help the learning to happen. I'm really happy with the way it came out. I just think it's so cute with the little deer and all. So anyway, Continuing on, more language arts learning and copywork with quotes from the book. Another exercise or wilderness workshop. This is another type of vocabulary worksheet that ChatGPT created the text for, and then I made it pretty. More copywork, some geography learning. And we're doing a lot of hands-on activities for these 2 chapters. That'll be fun. Another crossword puzzle. I just love that. More language arts learning. Here I'm having them create their own simile talking about the moon, because that's what's being talked about here. The picture didn't come out too well, but it's a quote from the book talking about the moon coming up and how it's as big as a pumpkin and as orange. So I'm going to have my kids focus on trying to create their own simile describing the moon. Okay, this I'm excited to do with the kids. This is a little bit of science learning. So we have this passage from the book where Sam, the protagonist, describes how he built this fireplace in his little treehouse situation, and then had a little bit of a scare when he realized it was sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So doesn't go into detail about why that is, and my kids might know, but they might not. I thought this would be a good time to do a little bit of learning about this. As inspired by the book. So I could have created this like a regular worksheet where I ask a question and then they research it and then write an answer. But I chose instead because I want this to be a low stress. I want this to be a fun activity. And they have science learning they do in other ways. So I want it to be a low stress activity. So instead, these are going to be discussion questions, kind of conversation starters. And the questions are going to guide that process of learning. I'm going to do this with them, where I ask the question like, why did the fireplace use up all the oxygen? And if they know, great, we can move on. If not, then we'll pull up an online encyclopedia talking about oxygen and fire and learn about it. And that's another reason I wanted to make it more of a discussion, because since I have 2 different kids that I'm doing this with, and I'm not sure what, like, do they actually know what it means to ventilate something? Since one might know more than the other, and since I don't exactly know everything that they know on this topic, creating a worksheet was more of a hassle, I thought, than it was worth. So instead, I just included here questions to guide our discussion and our research, and maybe I'll have them write down some answers here in the blank space. But the point of it is just to get some science learning to happen, to relate it back to the book. And since it's part of the story, it'll help them to remember it. So this is another vocabulary worksheet that ChatGPT created the text for. This was one of the more creative ones, where it took the words and created a fun little story out of it. So I thought that was a fun one, and I love how the worksheet turned out. I thought it's so pretty. Isn't it pretty? All right. Let's see if there's another crossword puzzle, copywork, and all. On this page, I happened to come across when I was looking for YouTube videos, and that is something else I include different places we're going to watch, like this YouTube video, and that's something they're going to do with me. It's videos that I've watched and vetted. But when I was looking for videos about falcons, I came across this video on Art for Kids Hub on their YouTube channel. I don't know if you've seen that YouTube channel. It's great for kids who like to draw. When I saw that he has a video about how to draw this peregrine, I'm not sure how to pronounce that.
Peregrine.
How to draw a falcon, a diving falcon. And there's this part in the book where Frightful is diving. I thought, well, this will be a great place to include a little artistic exercise here. More vocabulary, reading summary, language arts, learning, copywork. So you see, I obviously came up with some activities that I repeated and liked. Here's another science learning one. The conflict in this book, as I would define it, is Sam, the protagonist, is he going to be able to survive the winter by himself in mountains? And so when we get to the part of the book where you see he is surviving. He's doing pretty well, but he eventually sees that he has some issues. He's having some physical issues, and some interesting things are happening. And he does some research at the library, and then realizes because he's not getting as much, since it's the middle of winter, and he's not eating as many plants as he normally does, or as much of a variety of plants. Finally got that out. Whew, that was rough. He realizes he's missing a couple of important vitamins and that there's other ways to get them. So we're going to research that. I have some questions here for us to answer to guide our conversation and our research, and I think that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to that. I have here a sequencing activity when we're learning about maple syrup. We're going to watch a video about that as well. This is really interesting. There's this part of the book where Sam, the protagonist, is toward the end where he's been alone a lot, and he starts what he calls these forums, where he imagines speaking to people that he knows to like come up with ideas to solve problems and all. And so I'd known from something else I was watching before that there is this type of meditation, where kind of like a what would Jesus do situation, where you ask yourself, what would this other person think about this? It helps you to get outside of your own head for a second, so to speak. Maybe interrupt the way you're thinking about something and think, well, what would this other person say about that? What would Jesus do in this situation? What would my mom do? What would my dad say? What would my friends say? What would this teacher say in this situation? And it can help you, like the actual person might not actually tell you the advice that you're thinking, but it kind of helps interrupt the way you're thinking about it. If you're just kind of feels like you're just circling the drain and never coming up with something new and can't figure something out. Like if you think about the way someone else might think about it, it can help interrupt the way you're thinking. Probably not making any sense, but anyway, my point is this is type of meditation. And so I use ChatGPT to help me to describe it. And I kind of played around with it a bit and with the wording. And then I have a little exercise down here that we're going to do together where I'm going to recommend, and because this I think is a great life skill. And instead of titling this meditation, I titled it Coming Up with Ideas. So if you want to come up with ideas for solving a problem, for creating something new or whatever, maybe think about different people, what they might say on that topic. And it'll help you to come up with ideas. I'm hoping that if they get a little bit of practice with this, that this could be a useful little skill for them to have in the future. Okay, here's another little story ChatGPT created for me, and I made it all pretty. So pretty, more geography, more nature. Okay, for an assessment, and this is the power of creating your own novel study for your kids that's geared to your kids. Normally, when you're going to assess learning for a novel, what are you going to have? You can have a book report, maybe an essay, a speech, maybe a test. I don't want to do any of those things. I wanted to do this in a more fun way, but I did want to assess their learning. So I know my kids love YouTube videos because, like every other kid out there, they think they're going to grow up to be a famous YouTuber. And I'm like, boy, if you only knew. If you only knew. I have a lot of experience in creating videos that people don't watch. So I thought I'd give them that experience as well, to see how it's a lot harder out there. They might want to have a plan B. This is what, especially my youngest, I'm always telling him, it's like, you got to have something to talk about. Like, have a plan B. And so this is going to be our experience with that. I'm going to have them create a YouTube video. My plan is that they do this together, work on it together. We'll see how that goes. But I want them to create a faceless YouTube video. Depending on how it works out, I might post it on this channel when we get to that. I don't know, but it's another way that we can pull in some AI learning as well. So one day they're gonna work together to fill out these little boxes. This is gonna be the outline for their YouTube video, for the script. And another day I'm gonna have them decide, who's going to talk about what, and then record the voiceovers, which we'll put together. And then we're gonna use a website called, I think it's called Pictory.ai. I'll link it down below, where you can upload like a script or a video and hopefully just a voiceover, because that's what I'm planning to do. And then it'll match up what's being said to stock images and video to create this video. And you've probably seen videos like this and don't even realize it, where someone's basically written an essay and then you're watching this video and hearing the voice or hearing someone talk about it, maybe even an AI generated voice talking about it. But the images you're seeing are just kind of related to what's being said, not necessarily exactly about what's being said. So that's my plan for this. This is like a great experiment. That's my plan. So we're going to do that. And depending on how it works out, I might post it on here, I might not, who knows. But I thought that might be a fun way to end the study of this novel, to touch back on things that they learned in the past about it and where it's been a while, to maybe learn a new skill about like doing voiceovers, a script, using that Pictory.ai website. And, that's one of their delights, creating a YouTube video. So they're always asking me if they can have a YouTube channel. I'm like, no, sir, you may not. But maybe this will teach them something about YouTube and see how they like it. So I thought it was a fun way to tie up the study. Creating a novel study using ChatGPT was fun, but I wonder if I can create a unit study, maybe for science, using ChatGPT. Watch my next video to see how I do that.